The Good Captain Jayme Dawson, written by TMarkos. They were undoubtedly Feck. Arn stared out the viewport with mounting dread as the pirates fanned out around them in space. The strong glow of their shields only outmatched by the blazing lines of the interdiction net woven around the merchant's burden. His ship. His first ship. And now they were going to take it from him. He took a steadying breath, his gill flaps flaring away from his agitated teal skin of his neck, then turned to face his crew. They were few and somber, appropriate for the situation. Kayet and Ryan had been his pilot and navigator since the beginning, and they knew what captured by pirates meant. Slavery as chattel, if they were lucky. Indentured labor with some vacuum-blasted mine if they weren't. Ryan had just taken his second mate during their last stop home. The poor man. Behind them were Crostal and X, the grizzled engineers that kept the whole ship afloat. He couldn't blame them for their current situation, of course, because what freighter could ever outrun the combat cruisers favored by pirates? Even if he were to commit them all to financial ruin by dumping their cargo, the pirates would outstrip him handily. Crostal's gathered face wasn't suited for displaying fear, but X had gone deep crimson in alarm and retreated into his carapace as soon as it became clear that they were cornered. Arn could hardly blame him. His gaze turned to the newest members of his crew, Daniel and Richard, two humans, not a race he commonly flew with, although, he thought mournfully, it's not like he would be flying with anyone going forward. They had signed on as stevedores and extra hands for Crostal, although it had emerged sometime in their second run that Daniel was surprisingly talented cook. Maybe he could get a nicer posting as a house slave. Arn thought, resolving to mention it to the pirates. The poor bastards didn't seem to know which was his aft half the time, and he couldn't see them surviving a day in a labor camp. Of all the crew, he worried the most about them. He took another deep breath, then began his last address to the crew. Friends, he intoned, I'm truly sorry. I have failed you as captain, and now we stand to lose our freedom and our livelihood. He gripped the console to steady himself, a rush of emotions making his breath flutter. All of these years building up his pathetic personal holdings. And for what? For a crew of bedraggled pirates to steal it out from under him. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But nevertheless, it was. Arn looked up again. Remember not to resist when they board us, or you'll just get injured. Daniel, make sure to tell them. Daniel's bestubbled face gaped wide in shock as he peered over Arn's shoulder, staring out the window with awe. Captain, look at that, he shouted, his greasy finger outstretched. Hope flared in Arn's heart as he spun around. Was it the fleet? Had they heard his distress beacon? The chance of a battlecruiser being in this vicinity? But as he saw the object of Daniel's astonishment, his heart sank once more. No battleship, but a mere patrol boat streaked into view with an odd vector. They were still far off, but the tiny boat was barely visible as a speck on their view screens. Compared to the pirates and their 4 cruisers, the boat may as well have been another poor fuck in a freighter. Arn shook his head. Kayet, he said softly, hail them. Tell them that we appreciate the effort, but they can't help us. There's no sense in that little boat getting killed in our account. Kayet nodded grimly and began to hail. Then frowned. Captain, we can't hail them, he said in confusion. They're either locked down or their comms are dead. Idiots, Arn seethed, gripping his console even tighter as he watched the ship spiral towards its inevitable death. Already 2 of the pirates had peeled away from the group to intercept the new arrival. But even if they had all left, it would be a trivial matter to recapture the burden. The points of light drew closer and closer in the viewer, and as they closed to engagement range, the pirates fired with dazzling beams of energy that seared white lines against the cosmos, and fled an impossibly brilliant blood red when they struck the shields of the patrol boat. Arn's mouth gaped open in astonishment as the patrol boat weathered not 1 salvo, but 2, then 3, its tiny shields seeming to grow brighter and brighter until they were shining like a bloody star against the void. Then it struck back, crimson lances of light beggaring the weapons of the pirates with their roaring fury. The pirate cruisers had stout shields, but as multiple beams hammered again and again into the weakest points of the protective shell, Arn saw the captains of the ships waver. It was too late to run. One by one, the pirate ships lost their shields, flashes of actinic blue-white splashing from their hull as the generators overloaded. The next shots from the gunboat carved into their fleet's stern without resistance, sending glittering fountains of red-hot plasma and the flaming bodies of crew sailing away in spirals. Sa'an could make no sense of it. How could this tiny ship be facing down one of the strongest pirate fleets that he'd ever even heard of, and still be winning? He couldn't even feel the joy of salvation amid the maelstrom of disbelief that swallowed him as he watched the last pirate cruiser split in two, its primary reactor going up like a miniature sun. The red ship slowed its course after the last of the pirates died, swinging wide to come around beside them. Sa'an tore his eyes away from the viewport and turned back to Kayet, completely at a loss. "Can you still not hail them?" he croaked. "What are they?" As Kayet tried once more to connect their communicator to that of their mysterious savior, Sa'an noticed that Richard was excitedly batting at Daniel's shoulder. He walked over dazedly to hear what the rotund human was sputtering. "Red shields, Danny," she whispered. "It's the beams that were red too, just like the old Georgie used to tell." Daniel nodded back with a huge grin plastered on his face, his fingers drumming nervously on the console in a tick. "I saw, Ricky, I saw. It were the Christian, for sure." "Gentlemen," Sa'an said hoarsely, "are you familiar with that ship?" "Oh, yes, sir," Daniel replied earnestly, shooting up to stand at attention. "That's the Jayme Dawson ship, sir, that is." Richard stood beside him, nodding fervently. "For sure it is, Captain. No other ship like it." Sa'an was dumbstruck. These two knew about this mysterious ship. He couldn't dislike the two humans, but they had never given any impression of worldliness, or broad knowledge, or of narrow knowledge, or knowledge of any sort. For them to know the ship on sight was absurd. "Wait," he said, grasping for some logical purchase. "You've seen the ship before?" "Oh, no, sir," Daniel said, shaking his head. "It's a lucky man that sees the Dawson's Christian, a poor sod that hopes to see yet. But we know the stories, we do." Richard nodded even harder next to him. "Oh, aye, the stories," he said. "And the songs, Danny." Daniel scowled and swatted Richard on the shoulder. "Quiet, you dumb bastard. Don't be bothering the captain with the trash you call singing." He turned back to Sa'an apologetically, his face becoming animated and with excitement again. "Begging your pardon, sir," he said cautiously. Sa'an stood absolutely dumbfounded. Not only was this more words than he had ever heard either of them speak in a row, but he had understood none of them. Most days he would have to put it down to their odd manner of speaking, but he was reasonably sure the problem lay elsewhere today. The churning gears of his mind were rudely interjected by a shot from Kayat. "Sir," Kayat yelled, "they're swinging around close and dropping shields." "Ooh," Richard crooned. "Captain, you're going to want to look at this." "Don't tell the captain what he wants to look at, you daft bastard," Daniel hissed. "But begging your pardon, sir, they say the Dawson's Christian is a sight few men see and fewer ever forget. They do." "They do at that, Danny," Richard whispered. Dazed, Sa'an swung around to stare out the viewport just in time for reality to shatter around him. The ship slid by them, dangerously close, its shields down to reveal its battle-scarred hull. Huge rents were torn into the side down to the bed decking, and as they drew closer, Sa'an could actually see stars shining through some of the holes that transected the little patrol boat completely. But if the stars were all he saw, he might have slept easier that night. Instead, within the gaping wounds that pierced the ship, he saw shambling corpses. Their flesh was desiccated to naught but bone and the shreds of their antiquated uniforms, their skin rimmed over with frost from the cold void. But their eyes were the thing that would haunt Sa'an for years afterwards, blood-red and burning with the same hatred that shone like fresh murder from their shields and beams. Sa'an and his crew stared in stupefaction as the impossible, terrifying, unbelievable ship slid by, and, as it cleared their bow, faded like a bad hollow against the carpet of stars behind them. The scarred hull, the ruined decking, the dead engines all faded to nothingness. The last thing Sa'an saw was the grim and imposing stance of a tall man with one foot perched on his console, staring slightly ahead into the void. He stayed longest of all, his head slowly swiveling to fix Sa'an with his fiery glare before he, too, faded against the stars. Silence reigned on the bridge for a long moment before Sa'an turned wordlessly to look at his crew. They stood aghast. the impossible horror of what they had seen etched into their faces like the breaches in the patrol boat's hull. Well, most of them. Richard and Daniel stood with gigantic, soppy grins on their faces, still staring at where the ship had vanished. "What?" Sa'an murmured. "What?" "That were Captain Dawson himself, Ricky," Daniel cheered. "Jayme Dawson, come to save us from pirates." "Sure it was, Danny," shouted Richard from beside him. "Ain't the Christian with his crew, just like in the stories?" "Oh, aye," nodded Daniel. "And the songs, Ricky." "What the fuck?" screamed Sa'an, causing his crew to flinch in stunned surprise. He stood staring at his crew with wild eyes, his fists clenched and his gill flaps heaving. "What the fuck? What? I don't... How? They were... Where? They dead. It's... What the fuck?" "Well, Captain," Daniel said, unperturbed by his outburst. "Back in the War of 82 it was." 2782, Danny," Richard whispered. "Shut it, you daft bastard," Daniel bellowed. Sa'an stared at him blankly. "Begging your pardon, sir," he apologized. "Anyway, it was the War of 82 when Jayme Dawson got the Christian as his command, and it was the finest ship of the fleet, despite it being a wee patrol boat. But after the war, they was given to hunting pirates. That's when Captain Dawson really made a name for himself," Daniel explained. Richard nodded energetically behind him, his greasy hair flopping back and forth. "Ratcatcher Dawson, they called him, and Dawson the Scourge, and bloody Jayme, and—" "Shut it!" Daniel snapped. "But begging your pardon, sir, they did. Anyways, the pirate got to hating him so bad, they decided to lay a trap." "Dirty trap, Danny," Richard noted. "Shut it, Ricky." "But begging your pardon, sir, they made a miscalculation of it, because all the ships they had lying in ambush for Captain Dawson were found cut to ribbons, they were," Daniel said smugly. "But they never found the Dawson neither," Richard burst out, ignoring the scowl from Daniel. "The Christian and the whole crew were up and vanished." "Shut it, you gobshite," Daniel shouted. "Begging your pardon, Captain. Well, that's how it is. The old ship were missing, and to this day they say that old Jayme Dawson sails the skies, looking for more pirates to fight and good merchants to save." The two humans beamed up at Sa'an, having told the story to their satisfaction. Sa'an stared back at them, feeling small popping noises in his head. This is it, he thought morosely. They were captured by pirates after all, and his mind simply wasn't up to the stress. It had snapped, and he had imagined some sort of odd wish-fulfillment fever dream as the vessels in his brain burst from fatal terror and despair. Crosel made a soft burbling noise. "Cor, what a fright," Richard said, rubbing his chest. The popping noises in Sa'an's head stopped, and reality came smashing back into his skull. He let out a low, gibbering moan, then stared with wide eyes back at his crew once more. "Please," he begged, "please explain this. Somebody, I can't." "Well," Daniel said thoughtfully, missing or ignoring the look of horror in Sa'an as he spoke, "I can't rightly say what started him off sailing around hunting pirates with his ghostly crew." "Vengeance, Danny," hissed Richard. "Shut it," Daniel barked. "But it were vengeance most like. Some hatred, but most like it were vengeance." "Of course," said Sa'an, his hands opening and closing spasmodically. "A ship fueled by vengeance and hatred. It makes," he whispered, "it makes perfect sense." "Too right," agreed Richard. Sa'an stared desperately at the sight of his crew, but they had resolved themselves to silence. He heard what might be the sound of X vomiting inside of his carapace. "Could you," he whispered weakly, could you perhaps explain why nobody has ever seen the ship before now?" "Nobody?" said Daniel indignantly. "Why, if nobody's seen the ship before now, how comes we know the stories?" "And the songs, Danny," Richard whispered. "Shut it, you tone-deaf bastard," Daniel roared. "But begging your pardon, Captain, we don't rightly know how Captain Dawson goes about it. You may not see him much if there is no humans in your crew." "Oh, aye," Richard said breathlessly. "Captain Dawson looks after good human merchants. Not that he's racist or something." "Of course he's not racist, you daft shite," Daniel shouted, smacking Richard in the back of the head. "Captain Dawson is a pair of gongs of virtue, an upstanding man. Why else do he sail about the sky rescuing your blubbering arse from pirates?" He turned back to Sa'an apologetically. "Begging your pardon, Captain, but that's how it is. The Christian only shows herself if human crew rules it is." Sa'an grabbed his console so tightly that he could feel the delicate glass in the screen crackling. "Rules," he gasped. "Yes, rules for vengeance ship. With the dead people, of course there are rules. It all makes sense." "Right you are, sir," Daniel said agreeably. "Myself, I'm figuring I don't know how the hyperdrive works no more than I know how Captain Dawson sails around the sky with his bones out in the void." "And his ship all shot through, Danny," Richard urged. "Oh, shut it, Ricky," Daniel said crossly. "But begging your pardon, Captain, that is how it is. The hyperdrive still goes when Kayite there hits the button, and those pirates are still dashed to ribbons at the viewport. I don't rightly know how, but I see what I see. How's the good captain any different from the hyperdrive?" Sa'an sank to his knees and began to laugh softly, his hands clutching the sides of his head. He didn't know what'd help him. He didn't know. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.